What could a small child possibly say to a police officer that would make him call for backup without hesitation? When innocence meets urgency, the consequences can be life-changing. This is a story that begins with an innocent whisper and spirals into an unexpected turn of events that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The busy downtown area hums with energy. The sound of footsteps mixes with the honking of cars, and the rush of life fills the streets. People walk briskly, caught in the ebb and flow of the city, each lost in their own world. Amid this daily rush, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, weaves her way through the crowd, her wide eyes filled with fear. She looks out of place in the busy streets, her small body hurriedly navigating between pedestrians. Her clothes are slightly disheveled, and there's a nervous urgency in her step. She seems to be searching for someone, or something. Her eyes lock onto a police officer standing on the sidewalk, chatting briefly with another officer. The little girl pauses for a moment, as if gathering her courage. Her breaths are shallow, and her heart pounds against her chest. She looks around. No one seems to notice her, lost in their busy routines. But something's wrong. Something is happening that she can't quite explain. She clutches the officer's pant leg for a moment, hesitating just long enough for the world to slow down. Her small hand tugs at his uniform, gently at first, but with increasing urgency. The officer turns down to face her. He's seen children before, probably thousands of times during his patrols. But something about her, her wide eyes and trembling lip, immediately sparks a flicker of concern. The girl, her voice barely a whisper, leans up and says 4 words that send a chill down the officer's spine. "Mommy's in the car." His expression shifts instantly. The calm, everyday demeanor he's had all morning fades. Without a second thought, his hand moves toward his radio, his voice now firm and urgent. "Back up. Now," he says, his voice sharp, his tone commanding. His eyes never leave the little girl, and his other hand instinctively reaches out to reassure her. The officer looks at the girl, now fidgeting with her hands, her face pale with worry. She doesn't say anything more, but her eyes, filled with the weight of something only a child can understand, speak volumes. As he calls for backup, the city around them continues to buzz with activity. But for the officer, nothing matters but the little girl standing in front of him, the girl whose words have suddenly changed everything. The scene feels frozen for a moment as the officer's instincts kick in, his professional training kicking in at full speed. The officer scans the street, his mind already processing what he knows. Is the girl's mother okay? What exactly is happening? His radio crackles, a familiar voice on the other end confirming the backup request. But the officer's attention is still firmly fixed on the little girl, waiting for her to say something, anything more. The air feels thick with tension, the energy of the bustling city suddenly seeming distant and muted. In this moment, the little girl has seized the officer's complete attention. She doesn't say anything else. She doesn't need to. The officer already knows that he can't ignore the silent urgency in her eyes. "Where?" he asks gently, crouching down to her level. She just points toward the alley across the street, her body stiff with fear. That's all the officer needs. He quickly radios in the situation, requesting immediate backup and directing the others to search the area. As the crowd around them continues to bustle, the officer stands tall, taking swift action. His pulse now racing as the little girl watches, her trust now placed entirely in his hands. Lila, despite her young age, has faced her fair share of challenges. She's grown up in a low-income neighborhood, an area plagued by crime, poverty, and an ever-present sense of danger. But what Lila lacks in material wealth, she makes up for with an inner strength and resilience that belies her years. Every day is a struggle, and yet she carries herself with a quiet grace, navigating the world around her with an unwavering sense of independence. Her family has faced its own hardships. Lila's mother works long hours at 2 jobs, and her father has been out of the picture for years. She's learned to fend for herself, walking to and from school alone, despite the risks she knows all too well. She's seen things no child should, but she's never allowed it to break her. Instead, she's found solace in books, in the fleeting moments of safety that come from the quiet stretches of sidewalk on her walk home. But today, things are different. Today, Lila is carrying something that could change everything. Information so vital it could save lives, but it comes at a great personal cost. She's heard things that no one in her neighborhood should ever have to hear. The weight of what she knows is heavy on her small shoulders, but she knows she has to tell someone. She has to do something. So she does the only thing she knows how. She walks to the corner where Officer James often stands during his shift. Officer James has been on the force for years. A seasoned police officer, he's seen it all. The good, the bad, and the ugly. He knows how to read people, how to spot trouble before it erupts, and how to stay calm under pressure. His instincts have kept him alive in this line of work, and his reputation for being sharp and quick thinking precedes him. Today, however, things are different. Officer James is standing on the same corner as he does most days, watching the ebb and flow of life in his district. It's a routine he's grown used to, nothing out of the ordinary. His shift is, for all intents and purposes, just another day of monitoring traffic, keeping the peace, and making sure the street stays calm. But when Lila approaches him, everything changes. Lila, despite her usual confidence, looks smaller than she's ever looked before. She hesitates for a moment before walking up to him, her eyes darting around nervously as if making sure no one is watching. When she finally meets his gaze, she doesn't say anything at first. Instead, she tugs at his sleeve, a subtle movement that signals she wants his attention. Her eyes are wide, and there's something in them, a mixture of fear and determination, that instantly grabs Officer James's attention. "What's going on, kid?" he asks gently, his voice low but reassuring. He's used to seeing children in distress, but something about Lila's demeanor tells him that this is different. Lila takes a deep breath before leaning in, her voice barely a whisper. "They're planning something," she says, her words trembling but urgent. "Something bad's gonna happen. They're gonna hurt people." Officer James is momentarily stunned. His training tells him that kids, especially in neighborhoods like this, often have limited understanding of what's really going on. But Lila isn't just any kid. She's always been observant, smart beyond her years, and known for her ability to pick up on things most adults would miss. "What do you mean?" he asks, crouching down to her level, trying to keep his tone calm, though his mind is already racing. "Who's planning what?" Lila glances around quickly, her eyes darting nervously as she lowers her voice even further. "I overheard them. The guys on the corner. They're planning to take out someone tonight. I think they're going after the school. They said it's gonna be big. They've got weapons. It's not just a robbery. It's worse." The blood drains from Officer James's face as the weight of her words hits him. A school. Weapons. A dangerous plan unfolding right under his nose. He's heard of similar threats before, but something about the way Lila speaks makes him believe her, makes him trust her. He knows he can't ignore this. "Are you sure?" he asks, trying to steady his voice as he takes out his radio. "Where are they? Who's behind this?" Lila shakes her head, her face a mask of concern and fear. "I don't know. I heard them talk about it in the alley. They're waiting for the right time." Her voice cracks with the weight of what she's carrying. "You have to stop them." Without wasting another second, Officer James stands up, his mind already in motion. He grabs his radio and calls for backup. "This is Officer James. I need immediate backup. We have a potential threat against the school, possible armed individuals. I need all available units." As he speaks, Lila watches him, a faint glimmer of relief in her eyes. She's done what she can. Now it's in his hands. And with that, Officer James springs into action, prepared to stop whatever is coming, but also aware of the deep responsibility he now holds. Because of Lila's courage, he's been given a chance to prevent a tragedy, and he won't let it slip away. Lila's voice was barely above a whisper, but the words she spoke carried a weight far beyond her years. "Mommy's in trouble. Help." Officer James froze for a moment, the gravity of what she had just said sinking in. His first instinct was to reassure her, to calm her down, but the raw fear in her eyes, combined with the urgency in her tone, left him no choice but to act quickly. "Where is your mom, kid?" he asked, his voice soft yet steady, as he crouched down to her level, trying to gauge the depth of the situation. The words were still echoing in his mind. "Mommy's in trouble." Lila's small hand gripped his, her fingers cold and trembling. She looked up at him, eyes wide with fear, but beneath it, there was a sense of determination that only a child in crisis could have. "She's with them, the bad men. They're in the alley. She didn't come home. Please, you have to help her." A rush of urgency filled Officer James's chest. He couldn't help but feel the enormity of the situation weighing on him. A child's mother was in danger, and he was the only one standing between her and the unknown threat she was facing. It didn't take long for Officer James to push aside any hesitation. Time wasn't on his side. He immediately grabbed his radio, his hands steady, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "Dispatch, this is Officer James. We have a potential hostage situation. A woman's been taken into an alleyway. Request immediate backup. I need all available units in the area." As he spoke, his mind raced. Who were these men? What was their intent? His instincts told him that this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was more calculated, more dangerous. But one thing was clear. If Lila's mother was in that alley, she was in immediate danger, and he needed to get there as quickly as possible. Lila, though only a child, seemed to sense the urgency in Officer James's actions. She kept her grip firm on his hand, her little body trembling but standing tall in the face of fear. He could see the vulnerability in her, but there was also something else, something that made him admire her bravery even more. "Don't worry," Officer James said as calmly as he could despite the tension in his own chest. "We're going to find your mom, and we're going to make sure she's safe. You're not alone, okay?" Lila nodded, her lip quivering, but her eyes locked on him with a trust that only a child could have, in someone who had just promised to protect them. She looked up at the officer with hope, a hope that he wouldn't let her down. Just as he finished speaking, his radio crackled to life. Backup was on the way, and officers were already converging from every direction. It was a rare moment when Officer James felt the full force of unity in his department, knowing that every unit in the area was rushing to his side, ready to support him in this mission. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a sense of resolve as they worked together to move fast. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you trust your instincts in a situation like this? Officer James had been taught to trust his gut in dangerous moments, and right now, every second counted. He needed to act fast, and he needed to act decisively. Lila's words were the catalyst for what would unfold next. He couldn't let this moment slip by. "Stay close," he said to Lila as they moved toward the alley, his grip firm on her hand. The sound of sirens grew louder, and the officers behind him were ready to charge ahead. As they turned the corner, Officer James's heart raced. He didn't know what he would find, but he was ready to face it head-on. His resolve was unshakable. They reached the alley, and Officer James motioned for the backup units to spread out. He moved carefully, every step deliberate. They needed to handle this with caution. Any wrong move could escalate things. But the most important thing was that Lila was with him. He would not fail her. As he peered around the corner, the tension in the air was palpable. His hand rested on his gun, but his mind was focused entirely on Lila's mother. The threat was out there, but now they were closing in. And as the officers positioned themselves to move in, Officer James couldn't help but think back to Lila's whisper. Her words had sparked everything. Her bravery had brought them here today. And in that moment, Officer James knew they would stop at nothing to bring her mother back home safely. As backup arrived, Officer James and the rest of the team swiftly surrounded the apartment building. The sense of urgency was palpable. As Lila led the officers toward the building, the place she and her mother called home. Her small body, trembling with anxiety, moved with determination as she guided them. "Lila, stay close," Officer James urged gently as they neared the entrance. He could feel her fear, but there was also something undeniably strong about her. The resolve in her young eyes told him she had been through something traumatic, and yet she wasn't running away from it. Lila led them up the stairs, each step growing heavier as the situation intensified. As they neared the apartment, they heard sounds coming from inside. A muffled scuffle followed by a low, angry voice. It was clear something was happening, and it wasn't good. Without hesitating, Officer James motioned to his team. "Ready yourselves. We go in together." Lila, though young, was still a guiding light in this situation. She had seen things that no child should see, and yet she had responded with the kind of maturity that could save lives. Her small frame, leading the way, was a symbol of quiet bravery that set the tone for the officers as they prepared to move in. Inside, the officers heard the distinct sound of a struggle, Marie's voice frantic and pleading as she attempted to protect herself from the intruder. "No, get away from me." Her voice cracked with fear, but her words were clear. She was in danger. Officer James pushed the door open forcefully, entering the apartment with his team close behind. They quickly scanned the area, and there, in the middle of the living room, they saw Marie, alive though shaken, her face pale with fear. She had been backed into a corner, her hands raised in defense, facing off against a man who was clearly trying to overpower her. The intruder stood between Marie and the exit, his back to the door. He was taller, stronger, and had the look of someone who had no regard for human life. But what he didn't know was that the officers had arrived just in time. "Freeze!" Officer James shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. The intruder turned, raising his hands in surrender, his face contorting into a grimace as he realized he was trapped. Before he could make a move, several officers rushed in to restrain him, securing his hands behind his back. Marie collapsed into a nearby chair, shaking and crying with relief. The moment she saw the officers, the weight of the situation hit her, and she let out a sob of exhaustion. But before she could say anything, She was enveloped in Lila's arms. Lila, despite everything she had witnessed, wrapped her small arms around her mother, holding her tight. "Mommy, it's okay. You're safe now." The officers quickly began assessing the situation. Officer James turned to Marie, asking her to sit down as they checked for any injuries. Thankfully, she appeared to be unharmed physically, though the trauma of the encounter would stay with her for some time. As the investigation unfolded, the full details came to light. The intruder, a man with a history of breaking and entering, had been planning to rob and harm the family. He had forced his way into the apartment, threatening Marie with a weapon, demanding money and valuables. But what he hadn't expected was Lila. Lila, with her keen sense of observation and bravery, had seen something wasn't right. She had overheard the intruder outside their door, talking to someone on the phone, and recognized his voice from a previous encounter when she had seen him hanging around the neighborhood. Knowing something wasn't right, she had the courage to approach Officer James and tell him what was going on. In that moment, it was clear. Without Lila's quick thinking and bravery, the situation could have turned far worse. Her courage had bought them the precious minutes they needed to intervene before anything escalated. The officers commended Lila for her actions. Despite her young age, her level-headedness and resolve had been the deciding factor in saving her mother's life. As they prepared to take the intruder into custody, Lila stood beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. Officer James gave her a reassuring pat on the back. "You did great, Lila. You saved your mom today." The intruder's arrest was just the beginning of the investigation. His criminal history was quickly reviewed, and he would face charges for attempted robbery, assault, and threatening a family. But for Lila and her mother, the real victory was that they had overcome a terrifying situation together, thanks to Lila's courage and the quick response of the officers. As the story spread through the community, it became clear that Lila was not just a child. She was a hero in the truest sense. Marie sat with Lila, holding her daughter tightly, as they reflected on the ordeal. The chaos had settled, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them both. Lila, still visibly shaken, leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Despite her age, the maturity in her eyes was clear. A young girl who had just faced unimaginable danger and acted with bravery that most adults might have struggled to muster. Officer James knelt down to Lila's level, his voice filled with respect and admiration. "You did something incredible today, Lila. You saved your mother's life. You trusted your instincts, and that's exactly what we need more of in this world. You were calm, you were brave, and you acted when it mattered most." Lila looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "I knew something wasn't right, officer. I knew I had to do something." Officer James smiled softly, his pride in her evident. "You did the right thing, and because of that, you're a hero." The officers cleared the apartment and ensured that the intruder was fully secured. His arrest was a relief to the family, but they still had to process what had just happened. Marie, though overwhelmed with gratitude, also felt a deep sense of pride in her daughter. As the authorities worked on the scene, the community outside buzzed with curiosity and concern. Word spread quickly, and soon enough neighbors began to arrive, eager to support the family. They were all in awe of Lila's courage. Back at the police station, the response to Lila's bravery was swift. The police department, recognizing the importance of teaching children about safety and how to trust their instincts, launched a new community initiative. The program would focus on educating young people about how to speak up when something doesn't feel right, and how to trust their own ability to act when necessary. It was a lesson that many in the community had missed, but Lila's actions made it clear just how vital it was. The program would also emphasize building trust with local law enforcement, showing children that the police could be a resource when they were in trouble, not just figures of authority to fear. Officer James and his colleagues were particularly involved, often speaking to children in schools, teaching them the lessons Lila had demonstrated that day. Lila's story quickly gained attention beyond her neighborhood. Local media picked it up, and soon, news outlets across the city were praising the young girl's bravery. She was interviewed and celebrated for her actions, becoming an inspiration not just to her peers, but to adults as well. Her courage was a reminder to everyone that heroism comes in all shapes and sizes, and that sometimes even the youngest among us can change the course of events with their actions. Marie was especially touched by the way her daughter's story resonated with others. As she watched Lila speak with the officers and the media, she felt a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. "You've taught me something today, Lila," Marie whispered as they watched the neighborhood come together in support. "You've shown me what it means to stand up for what's right, no matter the fear." Lila nodded, though she didn't yet fully comprehend the weight of her actions. "I just wanted to help, Mom. I didn't want anything bad to happen." The community's reaction was a mix of admiration and renewed faith in the power of standing up for what's right. The police department, inspired by Lila's actions, began to actively engage with the community to foster trust and transparency. Lila's bravery became a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, showing that even the youngest can have the power to make a difference when they believe in themselves. As the weeks passed, Lila's story continued to inspire other children, encouraging them to speak up when they saw something wrong and to trust that they could make a difference. The neighborhood slowly began to heal, coming together in the aftermath of the incident, motivated by the lessons Lila had taught them. In the end, it wasn't just the police who were changed. The entire community had been touched by the bravery of a young girl who knew, without hesitation, what was right, and had the courage to act on it. The neighborhood had changed since that fateful day. What had once been a place of quiet uncertainty now began to feel a bit safer, a little more hopeful. People no longer walked with their heads down in fear, but looked around with a sense of unity and trust in each other and the law. The officers had become more involved in the community, actively engaging with the residents. The children, especially, had learned to speak up if they sensed danger, knowing they could trust the police to act when needed. Officer James remained a regular presence in the neighborhood, not just in his capacity as a law enforcer, but also as a mentor to the children. He checked in on Lila and her mother frequently, making sure they felt safe and supported. His admiration for Lila grew, and he couldn't help but reflect on how her bravery had changed the trajectory of their entire community. He had seen firsthand what a young child could do when given the space to trust her instincts, and how her actions, as small as they seemed, could ripple outward and inspire an entire community to do better. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the buildings, Lila was walking home from school, her backpack swinging at her side. It was a little later than usual, but as she walked down the sidewalk she noticed a familiar car parked at the end of the block. It was Officer James, who had parked his patrol car near her usual route. He gave her a smile as she approached. "Hey, Lila," he called, waving from the car. "You doing okay?" Lila smiled back, her earlier fears of the world now replaced with a new sense of security. "Yeah, I'm good. Just a little late today." "All right, I'll be keeping an eye on you," Officer James said with a reassuring nod. "You've got a lot of people watching out for you now, you know." Lila nodded, feeling a sense of pride wash over her. She knew the community was different now, more connected, more compassionate, more aware of the importance of standing up for what was right. As she continued her walk home, she looked over her shoulder once more, catching sight of Officer James's patrol car in the distance. It was the little things like this, the presence of protection, the solidarity of community, that made her feel like things were finally changing. Her heart swelled with hope for the future. The lesson had been learned by many, but most importantly, it had been learned by Lila herself. A simple act of courage, a whisper of truth, had created ripples of change that could never be erased. She had been the spark that lit a fire of action and solidarity, and as she walked the streets, she felt more sure than ever that every small act of bravery mattered. The final line echoed in her mind. Never underestimate the power of a whisper from a child. It might just save a life.